Good evening and welcome to another weekly edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. My name is Ryan Roberts and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing pretty good.
No accent this week?
Good morning.
Stupid. What about you, Shelley? How you doing?
I was doing better before this thing started, but go ahead. I'm ready to hear a fabulous story tonight.
Yeah, we were doing fantastic.
The pre-broadcast conversation is just anyway.
You know how it goes.
We won't get into it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to see that, go join the Patreon. But this one, guys, tonight we're talking about Carl Tanzler and his corpse bride. Now this one is spooky, not spooky, but really creepy is the word for it. This one's just one of the creepiest ones that I've ever researched. And I knew about this from like seeing Unsolved Mysteries or one of those like kind of spooky paranormal magazine shows like back in the 90s. And I was at Half Price Books one day and I found this book, Undying Love by Ben Harper. And I wanted to get more into this story and check out what was going on with Carl Tanzler and his corpse bride. You guys know much about this one?
I know a lot of this story. This is one that I can't figure out. It gives me very conflicted feelings because, as you'll find out, and I'm not going to jump your story in any way. I'll tell you more my opinion on it at the end of it because I do know a lot about it, and I hope that I hope you found something that I didn't know because this is one I know quite a bit about. Interestingly
enough, and I think as you'll find as we go through this story, men and women kind of feel different about the way this kind of turns out and about this story. So I'm excited to see what you think. And Blake, what about you? Do you know much about this?
I actually don't know anything about this story.
Okay.
Oh.
So
all right.
Nothing. So I know absolutely nothing. So I'm gonna have this will be the
fresh ear.
very first time I'm hearing this story. So I'm kind of excited because I love dark and creepy and twisted and morbidly fascinating stories like this.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Oh yeah, because this one is morbid and creepy. You ready to get creepy?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go ahead and get creepy with this weird little German. So in 1926, 49-year-old Carl Tanzler left his wife and kids behind in Germany, and he immigrated to the United States looking for a better life. Things had gotten rather bad in Germany after the Great War, and Carl knew his sister lived in Zephyr Hills, Florida. So rather than trying to eke out a living in a defeated Germany, Carl left for greener pastures to set up a new life in Florida for his family. But, as we will soon find out, Carl's journey to the States may not have been completely altruistic, because Carl was searching for a companion that he believed he was promised. Carl had had visions from a young age of a dark-haired beauty that he believed was his future wife, reaching across the ether and defying time and space, beckoning him to come find her and make her an honest woman. But there was just one problem. Carl was already married, and his wife was indeed no dark-haired beauty. So Carl needed to break free of his homeland to go and find her. And it was now or never for him because Carl, he was getting older, and he feared his time was running short to find his ethereal love. So as soon as he hit American soil, he began looking. After all, he was free of his wife, and she was on the other side of the world. He could browse all he wanted to. And he took full advantage of this opportunity. And he looked high and low for his dark-haired beauty that he so desired. But he still came up empty-handed. And rather defeated, he made his way over to Zephyr Hills, Florida to go live with his sister, wondering if he would ever find what he was looking for. Now, once in Zephyr Hills, Carl moved in, like I said, he moved in with his sister, and he laid the groundwork for getting himself established. And by 1927, he had all of his stuff together. So he sent for his wife and kids to come and join him. Now, they were eager to start their new life in America. So they left Germany as fast as they could and moved to Florida.
Wait a minute, how are he going to find the dark-haired beauty when he's saddled up with a wife and a couple of kids on his tail all the time?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's why he came. That was part of the reason he came over. He was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go set up a new life in America. But
did the vision tell him, too, that she was in America?
Nope, she did not. Never said anything.
Okay.
As you'll find... What were you gonna say, Blake?
I had visions that I ran my own country when I was like 5, but I never went overseas to go find it. Right.
I mean, and the difference between you and Carl is you're not delusional, and you're gonna find that Carl is I don't know, man.
It could have been a premonition. Now, why are we just dismissing that he might have been having a premonition and the universe might have been guiding him to find this perfect love? Just playing devil's advocate, guys. I think he's a nut too, but go ahead.
He's a total nut job. Now, his family, like I said, they were eager to start their new life in America, so they left Germany as fast as they could and moved to Florida. But the excitement of the new world didn't last for very long, because Carl was still being haunted by the visions of his ethereal bride. He no longer loved his wife, and he yearned again to be free of her and his children, so he could seek out the spectral siren that continued to beckon him. He was looking for any reason at all he could to abandon his family. And he found an excuse one night when he and his wife got into a tiff. Rather small, but in his mind, he now had a valid reason to take action. So Carl just walked off into the night, leaving his wife, kids, and everything else behind.
Wait,
just
left. What was the tiff over? I gotta know. Was it like the thermostat was set wrong or something?
He left the seat up again, and she was tired of that shit.
She said, "Damn it, Carl! This is the last time you
fell
leave."
in one too many times, and now he had enough too.
Salt goes on the left, and pepper goes on the right. How many times do I have to tell you?
You know what though? That's the truth. In a lot of relationships, it's not something big. It's something very small. But he was already searching for a reason. He already had this in his mind that this was, and why he brought her over when he had already had this desire and this intention to find his new love. He should have left her back there and just been like, here's the paperwork. This is not for me. I've started over. You continue your life, because more than likely she had to uproot herself and their children from their families.
She did. I mean,
so that was a very selfish move. You know what? You want to go away, you go away. Don't make everyone else adjust their life because you don't want to anymore.
Right. I mean, they didn't know anybody. Carl was the first one that came over, and he was looking for a place for them to come. And I mean, they knew
why
no
uproot
one.
them if he already wanted out?
Right.
But yeah, a lot of times whenever people finally say that's it, it's usually over something very small.
Right. And he just left in the middle of the night and left everything he knew behind, left her behind, left his kids behind. I don't know how anybody could walk away from their children like that, but he was somehow able to do that and just kind of leave that old life behind completely.
I totally agree with Shelley. Mine was over a Swiffer, so.
Mine was really? Over eating the last cherry in a jar of cherries. That was just it. I'd had enough.
No. Mine was over a Swiffer. That was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, was a Swiffer.
Which is never what it's about, but it's just like, that is the last inconsiderate thing I will tolerate.
It's like, this is the hill to die on. The
exactly. Yep. That was it. Yep. That was it.
No, that's where I stood after I'd already climbed over all the other bodies that were on that hill. And I'm like, this is it. No more bodies on this hill. This is it. So it's just as far as walking away. As sad as it is, a lot of people walk away from their children.
Oh, they do it.
A lot of people do. And I'm of the opinion is if you are able to walk away, you should go, because that's not something they need to always worry about as being fear of being abandoned or whatever. Just let them do it and get it done. If you're that kind of person that you can walk away and leave something that you helped to create, you know, that you're, you know, then just go. Those kids deserve better.
Right.
But yeah, that's not. I got some strong opinions about that.
Tell me more, Dr. Phil. Come on now.
Hey, but I'll tell you, but maybe that actually gives us an indication of how well he can compartmentalize things. He's like, this is over here, and that's no indication and has no bearing on what I'm doing right now. Maybe that's, sorry, I'm playing psychologist. Go ahead.
We'll play later. I'll let you tell
your story.
Plenty of time to play psychologist with this nut. So
I won't do it right away then.
All right. So now he was now free from his responsibilities and his familial obligation, and he could pursue his fantasy at will, and no one could stop him. So he turned his eyes southward and headed towards Key West. Now, little is known about Carl's past before him showing up in America. The only thing we really know is what Carl told his friends and neighbors. But it's generally agreed that Carl did possess some medical knowledge, because shortly after he got to Key West, he was able to get himself a job as an X-ray technician at the old Marine Hospital. But a new job wasn't the only thing that Carl had. Carl Tanzler also had a new identity. Since leaving his wife, he was going around town and telling anyone that would listen that he was actually a German count named Karl von Kassel, not Carl Tanzler. And that he was drawing raised eyebrows and strange looks from all of his peers because they wondered why a man of his stature would have to work at a hospital if he was truly a count. Now, no one knows why he decided to change his name and his societal status.
He was counting on nobody asking questions. That's why.
Right. But it seemed par for the course for the delusional Carl. And since he was new to Key West, everyone just kind of went with it. They were like, he says he's a count. Okay, whatever you say, buddy. So, but nonetheless, right. But nonetheless, Carl worked hard and saved up enough money to buy some land and to buy a house, all the while searching fruitlessly for his dark-haired beauty. But his hard work and determination gained him respect at the hospital, even though he was crazy. So they promoted him from just being an x-ray tech to being able to draw blood samples for people who came in, which ultimately led to Carl's encounter with her. Now, her name was Elena de Hoyos. She was the second of 3 sisters and came from a working-class Cuban family. Her family had come to America to work in the cigar factories, and they gave her a vibrant Cuban upbringing in the Cuban community on the island. She grew up to be a stunning raven-haired beauty that drew the attention of every young man in the neighborhood, but ultimately she caught the eye of Luis Mesa, who she ended up marrying in February of 1926. The months after the marriage were quite blissful, and the newlyweds seemed to really love each other, and they made love numerous times. So it was no surprise when Elena came up pregnant. The young lovers were elated at the idea of being parents, but tragedy struck when she miscarried, and Elena's health began to deteriorate rapidly. At first, her mother thought that maybe the stress of losing the baby was causing her daughter's decline in health. But she became very concerned when Elena developed a dry cough, because word had traveled on the island that several cases of tuberculosis had been diagnosed at the Marine Hospital, which caused her family to fear the worst. And their fears were validated when tuberculosis began to ravage the island, especially among the workers at the cigar factory, who were forced to work right on top of each other and pass the disease amongst each other rather quickly. Worst of all, the strain going around was known as rapid consumption, because it caused its host to waste away rapidly. Based on all this info and her daughter's symptoms, Elena's mother took her to the doctor to be examined, and much to their chagrin, they received devastating news. Elena had the dreaded strain of rapid consumption, and she needed to report to the Marine Hospital immediately. So a few days later, Elena and her husband went to the hospital. Her husband stayed in the waiting room, and Elena was called back. And who should be called to draw Elena's blood? None other than Count Carl von Kassel.
I'm sorry. I'm never going to get through with a straight face on that name. Carl von Kassel.
Carl von Kassel. Yeah, he could have picked anything, but he picked that one.
Anything at all. He could have been Carl McDonald for all we care.
Nope, Carl von Kassel. Now, the first meeting would prove to change both their lives and their afterlives, because as Carl was drawing blood from Elena, he looked into her face and was absolutely dumbfounded. His heart beat out of his chest, and he became flustered. He could not believe his eyes because she was the exact woman from his visions. He had found the dark-haired beauty of his dreams. He didn't know what to think. His mind raced, and he apologized for hurting her while he was drawing blood. He took his blood sample and excused himself and went back to his lab, with visions of Elena bouncing around in his head. But this malaise and elation was short-lived when he read her file, and at the very top of it, in big bold letters, it said, Ms. And the title stuck like a dagger in his heart. He had finally met his beloved, and she was taken. But deep in his soul, he knew that she was his. And he wasn't going to let a little thing like marital status stop him.
Oh, that pesky husband.
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
Figure it out.
Now, he had fallen for her instantly, and he was going to have her. He examined her blood tests, and that afternoon got a bit of good news. Elena was coming back to the hospital the next day to get x-rays. Carl was absolutely ecstatic. He would get to see his beloved again and get to examine her. It was going to be his time to shine. The next day, Carl nearly floated to work. He was so happy that his heart raced as he waited for Elena to come in. The hands on the clock slowly creeped by as he waited for that afternoon, and finally the time came. Elena's mother brought her in, and Carl took her back to the x-ray room. He asked Elena if she had been coughing. She said that she had, and her doctor told her that Carl could tell her if she actually had tuberculosis. Carl said he absolutely could, and got to work preparing her for the x-ray. So he asked for her hand and checked her pulse, but began to sweat bullets as he held her hand and timed her heartbeat. He then put his stethoscope on her almond skin, right between her shoulder blades, and reveled in every heartbeat that he heard.
Ryan is just making this creepier the way he's
No,
reading.
Ryan, I was about to say, Ryan, your description of this just makes it sound very, very predatory.
He is a creepy little old man. That's exactly what he's doing. And
put it on her almond skin. You couldn't just say put it on her skin, my friend.
No, I mean, hey, I gotta be descriptive here. So,
I'm okay if you're less descriptive during this part.
no, this is about as weird as, I mean, not as weird as it gets, but this is
I'm
about
just gonna
as
wait
like,
for
Oh, this
Ryan to
isn't
be
anywhere
like,
near as close as weird as it gets.
No.
I'm just waiting for Ryan to be like, and he breathed softly on the back of her neck and
He would say
you
something.
know,
He breathed and dropped her like a sack of potatoes on the back of her head.
You
That's the way
know,
he'd say it.
I'm not gonna lie to you. The book was way more descriptive than this. And I had to dial
wait.
it back a little bit.
Quick question, actually.
Yes.
Like, not trying to be funny, but
Sure.
what's the age difference here again?
She is 21 or 20, and he's like in his early, I think he's in his early 50s at this point. I think that's how
Amber
old
alert!
he is.
Amber alert!
Yeah,
Amber alert.
he put it on her almond skin. You're right. Go for it.
I think he is. I know he's like, he looks much older than what he is. I don't know what's up with him, but he does. But I think that's about how old he is and how old she is at that point. But
I guess she's technically legal.
she is. But he's just kind of a creepy old man.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not against an age gap by any means. Like,
Right.
do you, boo? But this just sounds very creeper status.
It's very lecherous.
Right.
It's very, and that's what
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what makes. Like I said,
yeah.
I don't like age gap. Okay, but
Right. He's
very lecherous.
He's a little too happy about getting to examine her in a medical, space.
Yeah.
So, but the doctor then told Elena to unbutton her shirt so he could hear her breathe better.
God.
But he really had an ulterior motive to see a little more of his patient. Now, Elena was quite uncomfortable. Only her lover had seen this much of her and touched her in the places that Carl was touching her. But he figured she figured that he knew best, so she complied. He seemed to be taking an awful long time listening. So she asked if he was hearing anything. Carl said, unfortunately, yes. Her lungs were having quite a bit of trouble, but the x-rays would reveal the cause. He also assured her that if she did have tuberculosis, she need not worry, because he could treat her if she did. So he placed her in front of his x-ray camera and took several pictures of her lungs. He again tried to ease her worries and told her she could get better under his care, and told her to go home and get some rest. He would develop the film and let her know the results ASAP. So Elena went home to rest up, and Carl got to work. He was so happy to have been in her presence again, but deep down he knew that the girl was sick. However, he didn't know just how sick. But it became apparent when he developed the x-rays, because Elena's lungs were ravaged with lesions. She had a terrible case of advanced tuberculosis, and she didn't have much time left. But Carl pledged himself to healing her. He would do anything that he could to make sure that she was okay. And when he revealed the devastating results to Elena and his pledge to her family that he was determined to heal her, they invited him to come by their home, and he gleefully accepted the invitation. But before his first visit, Carl's diagnosis had an unintended consequence. Elena's husband wasn't prepared to deal with a sick wife. So he packed up and left her for another woman in Miami, right when the poor girl was in the throes of a devastating disease.
Stellar dude.
Yeah, he sounds fantastic. Now, Carl heard this news and jumped for joy. He felt bad for his beloved, but now no one stood in his way. So from there on out, while trying to cure Elena, he also began trying to court her. He began to shower her with gifts and praise and visited her frequently. And finally, on her 21st birthday, Carl told Elena his feelings. He told her to forget about her husband. He would marry her and take care of her. But Elena said she couldn't marry Carl because she was still legally married to her husband. But Carl persisted and decided it was a good time to tell her of the visions he had of her when he was younger. Elena listened intently to his doddering ramblings, but it was very confusing, it was very confusing for her, and she gave him a strange look. She said, "Carl, you aren't making any sense, but I am a very sick girl. We will see what happens when I get better." So she was kind of trying to let him down easy, like, hey, back up a little bit. We'll see what happens when I get better, because she knows she's sick.
Well, the only thing stopping them was the fact she was married. What about the fact this asshole was married?
Yeah, but
they're
nobody
both
knows this.
Married.
No. He's von Kossel now. He's not.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Not
He's
Carl
Count
Tanzler.
Creepy. Yeah.
Tanzler is married.
Count Creepy.
Count
Count Creepy.
Von Kossel is not married. He's a count.
Count Dr. Creepy or whatever the hell. I don't know. Push the X-ray button. Yeah, no. Hell with you. Go away. Weirdo.
Unbutton your blouse so I can see your lungs.
Oh, stop.
Damn it, I almost choked on my water. Shit.
Now her saying this to Carl was enough for him, and it was music to his ears. He just knew he would have her after she was better. I think I broke Shelley again.
Yeah, you haven't broke Shelley in a while. By the way, every time you deliver dialogue from him, I need it in that voice from now on.
Yes, you have to do it in that voice now.
Okay. So he continued his cycle of giving gifts and confessing his love. But finally, her mother and father caught on to what he was doing and told him in no uncertain terms to quit. They said if Elena was to marry anyone else, it would be another Cuban, not some broken down old German. So they forbade him to see her and kept him away from her for quite some time. But Elena began to sink even further into the depths of her disease, and with no other choice, they allowed him back in their home to treat her. This time around, he brought in a machine that he could use to administer shock therapy treatments to Elena in an effort to heal her, which ultimately did nothing for the girl, as tuberculosis continued to ravage her system. But the sicker she got, the more obsessed Carl became. And one afternoon, after her treatment, he got it in his head that they had become married. What he said sealed their union was that afternoon Elena told him, "If I must die, all I can do is leave you my body. I cannot marry you while I am sick, but will you take care of my body after I am dead?" Carl said of course he would, and kissed her. He considered this his sacred wedding vow to Elena. And although he was truly delusional, did his best to care for her. But even his best was not enough, because on October the 25th, 1931, Carl went to work at the Marine Hospital and had planned to go by Elena's house to give her a treatment. But that afternoon, Elena's brother-in-law, Mario, burst into his office and said Carl needed to come with him because Elena had passed. The poor girl was only 22 and had so much life ahead of her, but the disease had literally taken the breath from her lungs. Carl and Mario raced across town and arrived at the house at 5 p.m. Carl just had to see his beloved. Maybe she wasn't dead. Maybe there was something he could do. Carl pushed through the large crowd that gathered outside and walked right into Elena's room. There she was, laying in her bed and not breathing, her eyes fixed in a blank gaze looking off into space. Carl couldn't accept what he was seeing. His heart broke instantly, and he immediately tried to find a pulse. But there was none. Carl's sweetheart was dead. He immediately began grieving his loss. But his grief soon turned to anger, and he turned his fury onto Mario. And he berated him for not coming to grab him sooner. And he told Mario if he picked him up sooner, he could have saved her. But Mario was confused and told Carl that he wasn't a psychic, and he damn sure wasn't a miracle worker. There was no way he would have known that Elena was going to pass. Carl said he was right and apologized. He knew it wasn't Mario's fault. He was just emotional. And he didn't mean to take it out on Mario. But for Carl, there wasn't any time to grieve. He got to work making Elena's funeral arrangements immediately. Elena's parents were poor and could not afford the burial. So Carl selected the coffin, the flowers, and the burial site, and paid for every bit of it himself. The family still thought he was strange, but were grateful he was around and willing to help bury Elena. So with everything in place and arrangements made, Elena was buried on October the 26th, 1931. And by all means, this should have been the nail in the coffin, no pun intended, for Carl's unhealthy obsession with the young woman. But it was not over by a long shot. After his dark-haired beauty was in the ground, Carl claimed to feel her presence with him every day. And without her physical body, Carl claimed no one could take her from him. And they could be together forever. But Carl was still very concerned with her grave and the physical body within. He was afraid that the water wasn't draining away from the grave properly. So he put a tarp over the top of it and arranged stones around it to fix the drainage issue. And with that done, people assumed he would move on. But this is Carl we're talking about, so you know he can't let it go and live and let live. He actually took it to an even weirder direction and began making nightly visits to Elena's home and told Elena's parents that he was going to live in her room because he felt her presence in there and he felt at home in the presence of Elena. The parents were rather confused but agreed to let him stay.
Oh, hell no.
So Carl began sleeping in her bed and sniffing her pillows.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
He's, I don't know, man.
Now, in certain stages of grief, okay, whenever you lose someone you love, when my grandmother passed away, she had a house coat she always wore. And for the first couple of nights, and even every now and then in months after that, grabbed that house coat just because, and I could smell her perfume on it.
Right.
So that's not that strange.
That's
How
not
is-
that
If you're grieving someone.
I did the
If you're-
same thing whenever my great grandmother passed away. I went into her closet and I grabbed a couple of her dresses and I, brought them to my face and I smelled them as well because they had her perfume on them as well. But
Right.
we're talking about in her parents' house. It's just
Right.
like,
That's where the
I'ma
line's
live
kinda
with you.
different, okay?
yeah,
I'm
Right.
not gonna fault him for wanting to,
yeah, I'm not faulting you for that either.
Well,
your senses
mm,
bring back memories, and if he remembers something good that helps him grieve by the scent of a dress or a pillow, okay. But yeah, moving into her house and sleeping in her bed, that's a little
That
far.
part.
right.
That part.
But the thing you have to remember too is like they were never together. Like he had in his mind that they were
Yeah.
together, but they never were. Like she never gave him any indication that she was going to marry him whatsoever.
Right.
Exactly.
But the delusion is still the delusion, and he is still
Yeah.
grieving for what he has going on in his head. The
Yeah.
parents shouldn't have let him move in there. Anyway, we
No.
can talk after. Go ahead, finish on. Continue on with the fabulous story. I'm trying to dissect him again.
Now he just couldn't let her go. And he stayed in her familial home and he had conversations with her mother. And one day he asked where the jewelry that he had bought Elena was. Her mother said that she had locked it up for safekeeping, and Carl told her to keep them locked up because he didn't want anyone else to wear them. Her mother said okay, but asked why he was so concerned with it. Carl then revealed that he planned to build a tomb and inter Elena inside it adorned with all of her jewelry. Her mother said that sounded nice, but would be of no use because by the time he would be able to dig her up and relocate her body, she would be nothing but bones. This statement hit Carl really hard, and he told her mother that he would not permit her body to decay. Furthermore, if she had lost her hair, he would buy new hair for her, and her mother instantly objected. She wouldn't hear of someone else's hair on her daughter's head. So she gave Carl a package of her hair she had saved from her daughter, which made the little weirdo jump for joy. And he retreated into his room and began designing plans for a grand tomb to inter his beloved into. Carl set the building of the tomb in motion fairly quickly. He bought the grave plot next to Elena's to accommodate the size and procured one of the finest stonemasons to build it. It took a little while, but when the stonemason was ready to begin, Carl got a disinterment permit from the state of Florida and moved Elena's body into the funeral home. And while the stonemason labored for 3 months on the tomb, Carl began doing a little bit of work of his own. He decided he was going to rebed his beloved in a new coffin and attempted to preserve her body from further decay. He had a vision of her that he wanted to keep, and he was going to do it come hell or high water. So he and the mortician opened the casket Elena was resting in. But much to Carl's chagrin, her corpse had suffered some water damage and a bit of external damage from the casket lid collapsing. But nonetheless, Carl was happy that he acted when he did, because further decay would have been heartbreaking. So Carl got to work quickly to slow the decay and sprayed the body with a homemade concoction to harden the tissue. And it made it easier to peel the fabric from inside of the damaged coffin and away from her corpse. When he peeled the fabric from her face, it revealed even more damage. So he cleaned her face and sponged it down with his bizarre solution. And to combat the stench, covered her body with several colognes. Once he was done, he and the mortician put her body, along with clean cotton, into her new coffin and placed it into a steel outer coffin that was screwed shut with 1,000 screws. But Carl's weirdness was not to be outdone. He returned a few nights later with a homemade incubation tank and several liquids he believed would, quote, nourish the cells of Elena's body and would further preserve her. So he again removed her corpse from the casket and placed it into a homebrewed mixture of chemicals before placing the tank back into the coffin and resealing the lid. Carl was now satisfied that his raven-haired beauty was well preserved. So he's just making up this shit like as he goes along.
A regular Jekyll and Hyde or Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
More Dr. Frankensteinish, I guess.
Yeah. Like, yeah, he's just like, oh yeah, these chemicals, whatever these chemicals were that he
like
decided.
concocting potions,
right?
You know, and now he's trying to reanimate this corpse and
essentially,
You got
Well, I mean, it's her parents aren't helping it. Well, her mother. I mean, I get
they
why
don't know.
They don't know. Oh.
No.
Well,
no, they know
so.
that the tomb was built and that he's going to inter and that she's been moved.
But they don't know what he's doing.
About all this. They don't know about all these side projects and experiments.
I was going to say with the giving that makes sense. With giving the hair and stuff like that, like obviously that's not help. I get why a parent would have their child's hair from like a first haircut or whatever. A
lot of parents, especially if they have female children, whenever their hair is very long and they cut off that first ponytail, because the kid wants to cut their hair short. A lot of parents kept up. My parents kept mine.
Yeah.
I said that was weird and I got rid of it.
No, but what I'm saying is they unwittingly know that they don't know that they're whatever I'm trying to say. They don't know they're feeding into this. Yeah.
No, they have no idea they're feeding into. They think that this guy is like, okay, he's kind of weird, he's a little strange, he's eccentric, but he's taking care of our daughter's burial. He's building a tomb. Cool.
So
we're okay with it.
We're going to extend him the grace of not giving him too much trouble about it. He's doing something genuinely kind for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's awkward that he was just her doctor, but he's doing something that.
Yeah.
I'd be having questions. I'd be like, excuse me, one second.
I would too, child.
I would too, but I don't think it is. I think that the level of poverty that her family lived in is understated and
as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking, okay, we can't give her the burial we want to give her, so this guy can. So we're just going to let him do what he's doing now. They don't know about the extracurricular activities he's doing, but they just know about that he's building a tomb. He's taking care of the burial. He's strange, but whatever. Now, with the tomb finished, Carl had her casket moved and interred at what locals said was the most ornate tomb they had ever seen. It was equipped with an ornate dome, Greek pillars, palm trees, blue silk curtains, and a porcelain doorknob.
Pick a theme.
Right?
I'm assuming that's probably the picture that I put up.
Yeah, that's the tomb. Okay, that's it, right there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, some said it looked more like a miniature summer home for the wealthy, and Carl had spared no expense on his deceased love. After Elena was placed inside, Carl faithfully visited the tomb every day for 18 months, never missing a day and sitting in the silence of the graveyard. But one night, things got very interesting. That evening, Carl was visiting the tomb and fell asleep.
They got interesting?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just got completely creeped out. I got chill bumps all over me. I'm like, ugh.
Just want to make sure we were all listening to the same story.
I know what's coming now. Go ahead.
Suddenly, he heard a loud bang that awakened him immediately. And he cracked open his eyes and noticed all the locks on the casket had all been popped open. And he heard a faint scratching from inside. Could it be, he thought? Could my love have returned? He excitedly threw open the casket lid and saw Elena intact. But this time he said he smelt no decay or chemicals. He only smelled his beloved's skin and hair. It was like she was returning to him slowly. From then on out, Carl began to talk to her and believed she talked back. He came back every day and had conversations with her for hours, saying he could feel her presence and her spirit inside the tomb. As time went on, he said he physically began to feel her hands all over him. And Carl bought a camera to take pictures, to see if he could capture his bride on film. And one Christmas, captured a photo of a human figure emanating a bright white light that he believed was a photo of his long-dead Cuban girl, or so he said. He also claimed that very next time that he went to the tomb, he saw a veiled white figure standing at the door waiting for him. As he approached the figure, it walked directly through the door, and he had no doubt that the spirit was the Cuban girl and that she had returned, which gave him great joy. But then Elena's quote-unquote spirit asked Carl to commit a crime. She told him she wanted to be with him and he needed to get her out.
Oh, God.
Carl said he desperately wanted to, but he didn't know how. But her spirit said not to worry, that she would guide him. So, per her spirit's instructions, Carl was to wear a tux to take his bride home. He was to bring a little wagon on the next new moon, and under cover of darkness remove her from the tomb, and load her into the wagon and take her home. So the time came, and Carl did as he was told by Elena's quote-unquote spirit. And the entire time had delusions of all of the spirits in the cemetery cheering him on and helping him make his escape.
Oh
Carl
God.
was elated, but when he came to the cemetery fence, he had to lift the casket over the top. He mustered every bit of strength in his tiny old body and attempted to get the casket over. But when he did, the ground beneath his feet crumbled and the casket fell back onto him, releasing a slurry of vile, pungent mystery liquid all over Carl. But he was undeterred.
I'm sorry, that really just got me.
But he was undeterred and got up and dusted himself off, and somehow got the casket over the fence and back into the wagon. He was almost home free and raced his cargo to a little halfway house that he had rented, and dropped off his precious cargo before sneaking back into Elena's parents' house, absolutely reeking of her remains. So he bathed to get the foul odor off of him and went to bed. The next day, he took his car to the halfway house and loaded the casket into the back and drove it to the Marine Hospital, where he had been storing a large airplane that he had been working on, and put Elena in the cabin for storage. She was now all his. Now that he had her all to himself, Carl began cleaning up her body again. His goal now was to have her spirit rejoin with her body, so that she would live again. But despite Carl's efforts to fix the body, there were some things that he had a hard time with. For instance, her eyes had rotted out of her skull. Where her two beautiful brown eyes once resided, there were only holes, and he knew where to get replacement glass eyes, but ordering two at a medical supply store would draw unwanted attention. So he had to mail order them and mount them in Elena's blank sockets, which he did with great precision and care. In addition to the eyes, there were places on the body that the maggots began to feast on. So he had to rid her of the parasitic pests and remove them from their free meal. Her lips had also dried up, leaving her front teeth showing, as if she were locked in a permanent smile. There wasn't much he could do about that, but he did focus on things he could fix. So he washed the body every day in soap and a chemical solution to keep the odor down and placed her in her bridal gown. Afterwards, he stared at her, dressed to the nines, and heard her voice ask if he still loved her. He said of course he did, and climbed into her coffin to be close to her, and placed a kiss after kiss on the cadaver's lips. He then lay there all night kissing her and holding her. He awoke in the morning and lay there next to her thinking that if he was to resurrect her like he wanted, he would have to make alterations to the body that lay before him. So he decided to make a permanent record of her face as he remembered it, and made a plaster of Paris death mask to get a mold of it so he could make a mold of her face. But he ran into a major problem when it stuck to her skin, and he dare not tear it off unless he wanted to rip the skin off too. So he painted over the plaster cast and left it. And that's that creepy looking picture where you have like a little painted mask over the top. Now, leaving her body looking more like a creepy doll than an actual person. But Carl was satisfied with her new face and admired his work. However, he did think there was still work to be done, and Carl began making vitamin solutions that he believed would restore her health to her system, and began administering them to her daily. He truly thought he was helping her and was hitting his stride, working on his living dead doll, when he got a bit of bad news. The new administrator took over for the Marine Hospital and saw Carl's unfinished wingless plane sitting behind the hospital and demanded that he get it off of government property. Carl was disheartened, but he had come so far. He couldn't risk being found out now. So he found a place down the beach with a shack and a hangar that he could tow his plane to and continue working on Elena. So he towed it down to the shack and set up shop with the quickness, and no one was any wiser that the dead girl was inside.
Yeah, because he was keeping her in this plane.
Yep. So Carl moved into the shack and moved Elena in as well. Now they were somewhat secluded, and in their new residence, Carl no longer had to keep her in the plane. So he had Elena out in the open and continued to administer chemicals to the corpse daily. After a while, her body had been run through with so many chemicals that it essentially mummified itself. Carl's delusions continued, and he would talk to the mummy like it was a living person. He was living with her as if he expected her to talk back. That Christmas, he even attempted to make her corpse drink. On that holiday morning, he propped her up and dressed her in her wedding gown and gave her gifts he had bought in town. Once the gift giving was done, he poured a glass of wine and took it in his mouth and lifted the veil on Elena and pressed his lips to hers. He then forced some of the wine into her mouth and swore she swallowed every last bit of it. Obviously she hadn't, but Carl was that far gone. But he had his seclusion and he had his bride. He couldn't ask for anything more and enjoyed 2 years living in his beach shack with Elena by his side.
Sorry, no.
What? What?
Comments. We just got good for her, I guess.
I said, but in 1935, his peace of mind was shattered because the WPA Public Work Program came to the island and a means to get people back to work during the Great Depression. So they began cleaning up the beaches on the island and violated Carl's solitude. So he had to move again to find a place to keep Elena from prying eyes. And luckily, he did, and in May of 1936, he moved into another secluded shack amongst the mangrove trees away from the rest of polite society. He now had to get Elena resituated. And in his new shack on the swampy part of the island, there was more hazards to protect her from. So he put her on a bed protected by double mosquito nets and a waterproof tent. But despite his best efforts, part of her body began to crack and leak juices from the openings, to which he would simply patch the problem areas with silk and seal them with wax. But the problems with her body continued to persist. Elena was beginning to dry out. But Carl kept performing preventative maintenance on Elena. And then the day he had dreaded for years finally came, when on September the 28th, 1940, Elena's brother-in-law, Mario, showed up to the doorstep of Carl's home with urgent news. He told Carl that someone had broken into Elena's tomb and disturbed her coffin. He said Carl needed to come with him to the cemetery ASAP. So Carl hopped in the car and rode with him down to the cemetery, where Elena's sister Nana, the city undertaker, and the cemetery sexton were all waiting on him. Now, Nana knew Carl had the keys to the tomb, so she implored him to please open the tomb and open the outer coffin, so she could see her sister and make sure that she remained in her resting place. But Carl refused, and the officials sided with him, because they didn't necessarily want to open a coffin that had been closed for 9 years. They gently reassured Nana that everything was fine, and she calmed down and went back home. Carl returned to his home, having staved off Nana's inquiries, and went to Elena and ranted about the nerve of her sister, all the while cuddling the cadaver and hoping Nana would leave them alone. But his wish was not granted, because on October the 1st, Mario again showed up and summoned Carl out to the cemetery. But this time when he arrived, Nana was not alone. There was a crowd at the gravesite, and Nana ran up to him and again demanded Carl open the tomb and the coffin. But instead of complying, he became angry and chastised Nana, telling her that she didn't love her sister or care about her safety. She only wanted to strip her of her jewels. Nana took a deep breath and plainly and quietly just asked Carl to please open the tomb. She said if she could just see that Elena was safe, she would be satisfied. So Carl reluctantly agreed to let Nana see her sister. He told her to come back with him to his house, and Nana's stomach sank. Could this man really be in possession of her sister, she thought? Nana hoped this was just a big misunderstanding. But all of those hopes were dashed when they arrived at the German shack, and Carl invited Nana and her husband into the house. He took them to the room where her sister's corpse resided and told Nana, "Come and see Elena resting in her garments and jewelry. She could not have it better anywhere else." And with that, he pulled back the curtain over the bed, and what Nana saw made her physically ill. She was face to face with a zombified version of what was once her sister, made out of a patchwork of flesh, wax, and silk. After retching, she snapped her head towards Carl and demanded to know how long her sister had been in this state. Carl replied, 7 years, and Nana began to feel faint. So she grabbed her hands, and grabbed her husband's arm and said, "Let's get out of here. I feel really bad." Mario escorted her back to the car and put her in the seat. But before they left, Nana yelled at him from the window, "Put Elena back in the vault. Do you hear me?" Carl fired back that he would do so when he was damn well good and ready. He owned the vault and the contents within, not Nana. Nana and her husband sped off that afternoon, leaving Carl with his corpse bride. He didn't know it yet, but because he had been found out, he was about to land himself in jail. Because Nana went straight to the cops with her discovery, and a few days later, on October the 5th, 2 sheriffs and men from the funeral home showed up at Carl's doorstep. The sheriffs arrested Carl and took him to the county jail, and men from the funeral home took Elena to Lopez Funeral Home, separating Carl and Elena for the first time in 7 years. He was booked for wanton and maliciously demolishing, disfiguring, and disturbing a grave. And his fantasy life with his cadaver bride was over. Although there was a circus, but as an unintended consequence, he became a local celebrity. As soon as his story hit the papers, it spread like wildfire. But instead of universal disgust for his crimes, there was a great outpouring of public sympathy for him, especially from women that thought what he did was an act of love so romantic that he wouldn't let death stop him. They hoped they could find a love like that someday.
Oh my God.
On the other hand, men were sympathetic to his plight, but were wigged out by the idea of what he did. And the story hitting the paper had made Elena famous too. People were very curious about her state and wanted to see for themselves. So Lopez Funeral Home put her on display for people to see.
Oh my God.
And throngs of people filed in to take a look at the post-mortem oddity. The whole situation was a circus. And although there was a circus-like atmosphere, the fact of the matter remained that a crime had been committed, and there were legal matters that needed to be settled. So on October the 8th, a hearing was held to figure out what to do with Elena. The judge listened to Carl and Nana on the stand as they gave their testimonies and ruled Elena's body was to be buried and that only Nana and other close relatives were to know where the gravesite was. That way, Carl could never again get his hands on Elena for his vile experiments. The judge also ordered a hearing to take place a few days later to determine whether or not Carl was insane. To everyone involved, all signs pointed towards insanity. But in a move that shocked everyone, after an hour-long hearing on October the 10th, 1940, the Sanity Board of Doctors deemed Carl to be sane. City officials couldn't believe it, and neither could Elena's sister Nana. How could someone who did the things that he did to her sister be deemed sane? But now he was declared sane, and the doctor could stand trial for robbing Elena's grave and desecrating her body.
Okay, makes sense.
But that didn't go the way people thought either, because a grand jury convened and could find no crime that they could charge Carl with. The law in Florida at the time carried a statute of limitation for 2 years for what Carl had done. He had actually committed the crime 7 years before anyone had found out. So the prosecution really didn't have a leg to stand on. On top of all of that, the entire affair had gained national attention, and the courts thought it would be a good idea just to drop it all together, and that way Elena could finally rest and the spotlight would be off of Key West.
But he could have, they couldn't get him on desecration of a corpse because he continued to desecrate the body. They couldn't get him on abuse of a corpse for doing things.
At the time, they couldn't do anything
with a corpse and I know he never admitted to any kind of necrophilia or anything. I
don't think, like in the book, there was a doctor that examined the corpse, and he could not find any sort of evidence that would have said that he would have committed any sort of necrophilic act with the corpse.
Okay.
So he even though it was really weird what he was doing, he was actually caring for the corpse and not doing anything. I mean, what he was doing was nefarious, but not doing anything egregious to the corpse. So, but there's no way. Yeah, there was nothing that any of the legal statutes. There's nothing they could have done for it.
Yeah, he outlasted the statute of limitation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now there was no justice for her, but now her family could move on. Now they knew her remains were safe, and the strange little German weirdo was set free and returned to his home. But because of the sensationalism of the story, he himself and his home became a tourist attraction. People wanted to meet Carl and get his story. So Carl began charging $0.25 per person to give them a tour of his home and tell them just what happened with his beloved. At first, he really enjoyed his celebrity status, but soon it wore thin. He just wanted a quiet place he could go and write his memoirs. So he decided to leave Key West and return to his sister's home in Zephyr Hills. But he was also angry at the town that tried to put him on trial for his love. So he decided to leave them with a little something to remember him by.
Oh, God.
That night before he left Key West on April the 14th, 1941, Carl snuck down to the mausoleum that he had built for Elena and placed 2 sticks of dynamite above the door with a timer that was set for 24 hours later, after he had already skipped town. If they didn't appreciate their love, they damn sure wouldn't get to enjoy a memorial to it. Carl left the next evening and set off for his new home, and at 1:42 a.m., Elena's tomb exploded. The authorities were summoned and they knew that Carl had done it, but decided not to pursue charges because he had left, and in their minds, it was good riddance to bad rubbish. We don't want to bring him back here. Screw that guy.
God.
So Carl moved in with his sister, but eventually got his own place, where he wrote his memoirs and got them published by a small publisher in 1947. He lived out the rest of his life with very little money, relying on a small bit of money his ex-wife graciously gave him weekly. And finally, one day in July 1952, the Count hadn't been seen in a while. So the sheriff went over to search his home and check on him. And there in the living room, they found Carl on the floor. And lying right next to him was a casket with a wax replica of Elena inside. He had shuffled off of this mortal coil and joined his beloved in the afterlife. And that is
so. Wait, he was found in the living room on the floor next to a wax replica that he made of her.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck?
And that is the story of Carl von Kassel.
What the hell did I just listen to?
I know, dude. Like he
Florida.
Was a Florida,
Florida man.
Florida man doesn't get jail time.
He was a strange little man, dude. Like everything in the story, you would think that he would have faced some sort of justice, but he didn't. He got away with everything that he did. And
you said ex-wife, so at some point she found him and was able to divorce him, and I'm guessing that is probably about the time that his name started hitting the newspapers, maybe, because I don't recall her, because you said his ex-wife. I don't recall her ever actually being divorced from him, but I guess she must have.
I don't think there was ever officially a divorce, but I just said ex because like he had left her so long ago and they were never together again. But
okay, well that gives the
yeah.
That
I mean, because he was married to Elena. Carl von Kassel was married to Elena. Carl Tanzler wasn't married to his ex-wife. whatever her name was, but she was, and her kindness to actually give that man anything after what he did to her
Yeah.
is, I mean, she has the patience of a saint, because he did everything he could to humiliate her. His name was in the paper. He was married to a corpse bride. He left her and her children in the lurch after bringing them over from Germany.
But
What was that?
it's very obvious that this man had a serious mental health issue.
He did.
He was obviously suffering from delusions. The fact that he's having conversations with, now wait a minute, now hang on, let me be real careful how I phrase this, because we have conversations with the dead as well. Okay.
True.
But
yeah.
He's hearing them alone and having conversations and believing that this inanimate object has the power to speak to him, and he's carrying on his daily life as if she's alive. And that to me, I find that very sad. And it is obvious that he's obviously in great mental distress and seemed to seriously decline in mental health after she passes away. I find this very sad, but there's a lot of very strange moving parts in this. And
right.
Was he ever diagnosed with any kind of mental illness that we know about?
Because like that state insanity board,
I think that they declared him insane, because they thought they were probably going to be able to put him in jail.
Maybe. He was in jail. Like, he was in jail for a little bit, and they finally released him after he had his little preliminary trials.
That they couldn't convict him on anything.
But they couldn't. But they can hold you until they convict you, until your trial date comes. They can hold you if they think. Okay,
but he never served jail time for a crime.
He was not convicted. No, but he was held for a little while
until his trial. Okay.
Yeah, he was never convicted of a crime though. And that's what I'm saying. That's what's so weird about this case, is that everybody thought that it was a slam dunk. We have a crazy person who desecrated a grave and stole a corpse. So this person did commit this crime, and this person is obviously insane, and he's going to go to jail for what he did. But they couldn't. I mean, it was legal technicalities that hung them up on that, and they could not convict. They couldn't convict him, and they couldn't say. I mean, even though they said he was sane. Clearly he was insane. He had delusions. I mean, maybe it was temporary insanity and not for long. I don't know.
9 years is a long time of temporary.
Grief-induced insanity.
This is an interesting one, because I just very quickly, I'm going to say that I am using ChatGPT for this, but just very quickly put the symptoms that he has with what he was doing. So the summary of the findings in here is that it was likely the result of a complex interplay between psychotic delusions, possibly erotomanic, I don't know, pathological grief, obsessive love, and necrophilic tendencies. It would be classified today as a comorbid case that would likely involve paraphilic disorder and psychotic spectrum features. Yeah, I think that this man just had some massive mental health, problems.
We all know that whenever, and I can speak for me, when you lose that one person at that time in your life who's the most important to you, you do feel like you're going to break. It's very painful. Every part of you hurts. It's a physical pain. It's emotional pain. It's a mental pain. It's a spiritual pain. And some people are better equipped to deal with that than others. And perhaps being that he was already teetering and walking this very fine line of sane and insane, or healthy and unhealthy, I think that it wouldn't have taken him much to break and go over to the other side. He was never violent. I will say, never violent. He never tried to harm anyone. That's why this is such an interesting case to me, because there was no inherent evil in his doings. No. It all was to do good. He wanted to care for her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to, memorialize her. He wanted to give her an everlasting life, which is a very interesting idea. If he never stopped talking to her, and if he never let her decay, and if he never let her memory be forgotten, if he kept talking, she was never forgotten, and therefore she was eternally alive. And that, I think, is why you have the women that get on they felt so sorry for him, because to be loved like that, even though his method was wrong, but to be loved that way, that's powerful. So I see why women.
Yeah,
would
I don't want to
done.
be loved that way.
No,
No, I'm good. I'm totally good. That is not a
but the idea of that
for
powerful of a love, the idea, not the actions, but the idea of being loved that much.
A love that reaches beyond the grave.
I loved my grandmother very dearly, and she sits right up there, but I don't have her damn corpse in the house, you know, and decorated with a
technically you do.
like that.
You're not Norman Bates in it.
Not
yeah.
Okay, technically, yeah. If you want to go on a technicality, technically I do. Yeah, okay. But I don't have her in full human form with a death mask over her. I mean,
that's a bit.
And I get like somebody said I would just classify him as odd. True.
Yeah.
Great diagnosis. Good job. And then they also said that would make sense to you, Shelley. That would make sense if they were together and married, not some girl he saw in a vision. Now, I'm actually going to come to the opposite side of this, because I think the fact that at such a young age that he had a vision, that he believed this was the end-all be-all love, I think that's actually what made it more powerful. I think had it just been, you know, okay, I love this woman, I was married to her, you know, could he have been obsessed to a certain level? Yes, we obviously see that he has the tendencies to go that far.
He's obsessive, yes.
I think the fact that he had the vision at such a young age led him to this level to hold on to her for so long.
But do you think that it was okay? If we're working on maybe he did have a premonition, do you think it was her? Or do you think he convinced himself that it was her in that vision that he saw?
I think he convinced himself. I think that I am going to work out the theory that he had a vision. I'm not going to doubt anybody's visions or anything that they experience. I never will, because we have a lot of things that happens to us that we can't explain. So I'm not here to doubt the fact that he had a vision. So I'm rolling with the fact that yes, he had a vision. I think what it was that from being so young to being an adult, we know how the mind works. Your mind is going to fill in certain details along the way. And if you have something that's so powerful of a vision in that moment, you tie emotion to it. And therefore, when she walks in, if she even remotely resembles this woman in his vision, that emotion is going to come to the surface, and he's going to go, that's it, that's her. And if he's somebody who has obsessive tendencies, as we see that he does, he's going to latch onto that. And he's going to run with it, as he did. So I do believe that he had the vision. I do not believe that Elena was the woman in the vision.
Right.
I just don't. Because why would the universe, if it through his vision, put her in his life already married? It would have made it so easy. You know, like you're not married, you're not tied down. She's not married, she's not tied down. Boom, here you go.
Well, not only married, but on the way out the door too, like on the way off to the next plane.
Like,
you know,
dying as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate. Okay, so he does. Why would the universe, right? You're saying why would the universe put her in his path if she was already married? She was dying. She was dying. He had already left. He was already on his vision quest. He had left his wife, and here she comes in, and she must be cared for, and the person in her life isn't willing to do it. That to him has to seem like the two worlds in the cosmos
Divine
colliding
providence.
and saying, this is where you're supposed to be. She needs to be cared for, and the person that was supposed to love her doesn't. And that is why we met each other right now. That, if you're working, child, I can make delusions make sense here. If that's what you're working on, those two universes just were interwoven perfectly. He was there to fulfill the need. She had the need. And it was his destiny. Because the man who was supposed to love her took off.
I don't think she was the one in the vision. I don't think.
Oh, I don't think so either. I think that it was a very horrible, fated chance that she happened to be sick and happened to be told that she had to go to that hospital, which hundreds of other Cuban people suffering from tuberculosis were supposed to go to. She wasn't the only raven-haired beauty that walked in there.
Right.
Yeah,
she was just the unfortunate one that met up with Count Creepazoid, and suddenly his own delusions take over, and he becomes obsessive, and now he is in his own hallucinations and his own, sphere of reality he's created. As sad as it was, he didn't live a real life. He lived his life in his mind, trapped in his mind, doing,
Okay, so do you think it was his grief that made him do what he did, or do you think he was already, I mean, he was slightly cracked, but you think he was that cracked already before he met Elena?
I think the grief probably broke him at the end, because if he thinks he's finally found it, and he was sure he could cure her. He was sure. And that ultimate failure, I can actually see why he would think psychologically that he couldn't fail her in death. He could not fail her in death.
Right.
So if you're looking at psychologically, if he's failed here, he's going to do everything to make it right.
Yeah, the grief definitely exacerbated.
I think the grief broke him.
I think it was already there, obviously, and I think that the grief just exacerbated everything. It was just like, oh shit, and so he became obsessed, almost in a cycle, obsessed, not just taking care of her, but obsessed with his own grief. He couldn't seem to let go of his own grief, for her to let her go. Because he's like, I gotta fulfill this. I gotta take care of her, and I'm not gonna lie, I broke when my grandmother died.
Right.
For like 6 months, I didn't do shit. I didn't talk to nobody. I put on like 30 pounds. I was eating everything. I didn't give a shit. I was eating my grief, So yeah, I think the grief absolutely can break somebody. If that's already there, boom, you're on a speedway to hella obsession.
So I know we can look at this and say that Carl is absolutely insane. We can, from the outside, we can look at this and say that. But do you think that there is a chance that he did have some sort of connection to the spirit world, and maybe he was talking to Elena after she was gone?
If there is a chance, in my opinion, I'm going to say is an extremely, extremely small one. This to me is more classical signs of mental health than it is, if you're trying to go down the road of like mediumship ability, psychic ability, or, along that lines, being able to communicate with the dead just at will. I think that might be a stretch. I'm going to lean more towards this is just mental health.
And I'm going to say, sadly, no, I don't. I think that these were conversations that he wishes he would have had with her.
Right.
More than an actual spiritual. You think about it, I do all the time. I talk out loud to myself. Now, whenever I start answering, y'all let me know, because then I've got a problem. But I talk out loud to myself if I'm thinking, okay, I've got to go do this. You're speaking out loud your list. It's kind of a reinforcement of what you need to do. And I think that all those conversations he was having were conversations he wished he had had. So he was playing them out in his own mind. I'm just of the opinion that he was in such a fragile mental state, and that he was truly broken. That this was his way of coping, because he couldn't let her go. Because one thing about a lot of people who live in that bubble, their bubble that's inside, any crack in that bubble that lets real life in could be very destructive to them. So, especially like dementia patients, my aunt suffered from dementia for a very long time. She didn't know me. She didn't know anyone. And she would thought that her husband was still alive, that my mother was still alive. And any crack in that bubble that she lived in panicked her. She would cry. She would feel lost. So whenever she'd ask, how was my mother? I'd say, hey, she's doing great. Because you don't break that. Because that's cruel to them. It's cruel. It's cruel for you to have to deal with it. But then you got to remember in that moment that you're the one that is strong enough to handle playing this part.
Hey, Shelly, do me a quick favor. Unplug and plug back in your earphones.
Okay.
We got a crackling going on. So.
Yeah, there you go. You're good.
Really
there you go.
Yeah, much better.
Well,
just kidding. But that's all right. We'll roll with it.
But yeah, I think that he definitely he was already cracked beforehand, and that grief did push him over the edge, and he could not handle that loss, and he did not want to let go, and he was never going to let go until the day that he died. Ultimately, that's why they found that little wax mannequin beside him whenever
that's the craziest part, dude. Like, holy shit, not only did he go through all of that with the actual corpse, but then you leave town, you blow up her tomb, and then you make a wax figurine of her. I'm
gonna tell you, that to me is less creepy than the actual body.
I mean, I'll agree with that. It's just crazy as hell that he's that And that just goes to show you how obsessed with her he is, because if they reburied her, nobody knows where she's buried other than family members, so he can't get to her. That's his only option at this point, which tells you, had he the choice, he would have gone and done it again.
Right.
You know?
And I wonder if he did have, because I didn't see anything in the material that I read, but I wonder if he did in fact have conversations with that wax figurine as if it were her as well.
More than likely. More than likely. Yeah, more than likely. I'm sure he would have done some type of what's the word I'm looking for? A personification or not? Yeah, whatever.
Right.
Projecting animation of a human, you know, onto this wax figurine. Right. Yeah, I definitely would have agreed that he would have done that.
All right. So what are your final thoughts on Carl, guys?
I have never heard this story. Very interesting story. My mouth dropped about 1,000 times and I almost puked on camera tonight. Thanks, Ryan, for that one.
You're welcome. So I know it had to get nasty, man, because it's a nasty story.
Yeah, I think we could have done without the coffin falling on and the juices flowing out. Anyways, very interesting story. My last thoughts on Mr. Carl here is I think that this is a man who had some mental health issues exacerbated by grief. That eventually broke him to do something that we can't fully comprehend why he was doing it. Just because he couldn't let go. He was obsessed with her, obsessed with the love of her. We don't necessarily exactly know why he did it. This is I don't think there was anything supernatural. I'm not going to fault him on the vision part. I'm not going to take that away because, you know, he could have had a vision, but everything else, with the talking of the corpse, the hands on his body, her hands on his body, I think that is a lot of mental health issues that had he just been able to get maybe some help with, maybe possibly it would have been better. But man, the wax figurine at the end, dude, that trips me out. But anyways, so yes, that's my take on that. I don't think he's a bad guy. Guy. Did he do some weird fucked up shit? Yeah, I'll agree to that. But yeah.
Final thoughts, Ryan?
To quote Toy Story, he was a sad, strange little man. not that guy. I feel bad for him.
Yeah,
I do feel bad for him because he just could not let go, and I hope he somehow found some peace. I mean, I hope Elena found peace too, because I hope that she wasn't being. I hope that her spirit had moved on and was not attached somehow and being like drug around with him wherever he took her body. But I do think that he was absolutely insane. And I think that had he gotten the proper mental health counseling maybe that he needed, it probably wouldn't have gone that way, but he was a strange little dude. Yeah. What about you, Shelley?
And I do think that this, to me, and again, I have a very dual feeling about this. I think that I feel a lot of sympathy for this man, with the fact that he loved so greatly that it really did break him. And again, I think there was probably a crack in the foundation to begin with. He was never violent. He did all of this out of love. As twisted and strange as it is, there was nothing violent. There never seemed to really be any ill intention. It really seems like he wanted this beauty, this angel he'd had in a vision, and exalt her when he finally found her in real life. And I think that is where the ultimate sadness comes in.
Yeah.
And I come with you that I hope that Elena's spirit never got trapped there. I don't think she did.
I don't think so either,
but I feel very sorry for this man who became so broken that he had to live in a world that he had to create and he had to stay in, that all consumed him, even to the point of having a wax figure made, because to live without him would have broken his own reality. And I don't think he would have survived it. I think in that case, he did what he had to do to survive and to keep what was left of his sanity intact. So with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right. Sounds good. Well, now that I haven't thrown up on camera tonight, yay, points for me. I'm going to deliver some messages and announcements for y'all. Y'all, if you want to support the show directly, you go and let me start this over. If you want to support the show,
why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
If you would like to support the show directly, go check out our Patreon page. It is going to be linked in our link to. God damn it. It's going to be linked in our link tree, which is going to be on our Facebook and our X profiles tomorrow morning, which is Wednesday morning. For just $5 a month, you're going to instantly unlock over 450 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcasts, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcasts. That's where you're going to get to know us probably way more than you want to. But it's also going to include never before seen footage, including the infamous dirty Estes methods. We've got those on there. And just so you know, your support from this helps us to keep bringing you these wonderful, detailed, and descriptive stories like this one this week. Thanks.
They're always weird.
If you're not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Make sure you stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal, looking for that green sound wave, or by clicking the icons in our Linktree link. Remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. And if you would like to meet us in person, your choices are dwindling down. I'm just going to be honest. We will be at the Paranormal Rock Down. No, they're not.
Are we going somewhere?
That's the joke.
Lots of places.
Oh, okay.
We will be at the Paranormal Rock Down at Broadhead Manor in Broadhead, Wisconsin on July the 18th through the 19th. Then we are going to swing on over to the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash from July 25th through the 27th in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Then we are off to the middle of the country for KC Paracon on August 2nd in Kansas City. Then all the way out west, 19.5-hour drive, September the 3rd through the 6th, we will be in Vernal, Utah for Phenomicon 2025. And finally, back up north, we'll be attending the Rock Island Roadhouse Esoteric Expo on October 4th in Rock Island, Illinois. So make sure you also go subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when public investigation tickets go on sale. We do have more coming this year. Thank you again for being patient with us. We are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps these adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends and make sure you tag us. And if you have a story, comment, or question, or you would like to have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com. That also goes if you want to be a guest on our show.
So go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. And hey, go and hit those thumbs up, hit those like buttons. Go find your episodes you like on YouTube and hit the thumbs up on them, by the way. Please.
And thank you guys for tuning in to another weekly edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Ryan Roberts. These are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt. And we will see y'all next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.